Brand new class of 2024 college basketball rankings came out on Monday afternoon at Rivals, and wouldn't you know it, Drake Powell is crashing the top 10 at yet another rankings website.
You are Locked On Tar Heels, your daily podcast on the UNC Tar Heels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, it's Tuesday, October 3rd, 2023. Welcome into the Locked On Tar Heels podcast, the only daily North Carolina show out there. I'm your host, Isaac Shade, and I want to thank you for joining us to get your Tar Heels information every single day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. By the way, if you want to hear all sorts of more great conversations about the Tar Heels, come join our Discord where we're having conversations all the time. I just finished having a conversation with some folks. We're trying to figure out if Carolina can land in the top 15 in football and basketball at the end of the seasons this year. Would love for you to be part of that conversation. Well, listen, coming up on the show today, we're going to talk about, is a 7-0 start to the football season a realistic possibility for Carolina? I also want to update you on some transfer portal changes that might be coming. But before we get to all of that, we got to talk about this loaded class of 2024 that North Carolina has. We obviously know that Elliot Cadeau was initially part of that class, reclassified. He's now already on campus getting set to play for the Tar Heels here in like a month. Wow. We're like a month and 3 days away. Or as we talked about on yesterday's show, just 5 weeks, or now 4 weeks and 6 days. But still part of this class is James Brown, who's playing down at Link Academy, where Elliot was from. But then the guys that are now the two crown jewels of this class for North Carolina, Ian Jackson and Drake Powell. And I think that in itself, even the fact that I can make that statement is pretty wacky. Because previously we would have said that it's Ian Jackson and Elliot Cadeau as the crown jewels. But now, with the astronomical rise of Drake Powell, who just continues to rocket up the charts everywhere on all the rankings websites, you got two more elite level players coming in. Well, on Monday, Rivals updated their top 10 for the class of 2024. And wouldn't you know it, both of these guys, Ian Jackson and Drake Powell, are part of that top 10. And so where it's at now, I've been trying to rack my brain to remember, has there ever been a player that has risen as astronomically quickly as Drake Powell has? There might be, and you might be remembering it and screaming it at me, but I am struggling. The one person I can kind of think of that it's similar to is Kobe White, right? Like committed pretty early to Carolina. Like I think he was a sophomore when he committed. And then he just kept on blowing up and coming on, eventually became like this elite level scorer. And I'm not saying that Drake is going to show up and be a one and done like Kobe was. And their games are different, but it's that kind of thing where it's like, oh, you just keep on coming to levels that I didn't expect. And I think a lot of people didn't expect it. And you know, with Kobe, I think it was this kind of thing where most of us didn't even think about him as a one and done until he got on campus and the coaches realized what they had with him. With Drake, we're seeing it happen throughout his high school ascension. So here it is. Rivals came out with these brand new rankings on Monday. Drake is all the way up to 8th. Just to let you know how wild that is, in their March 7th, 2022 rankings, so 19 months ago, he was unranked. 19 months later, he's number 8 in the entire class, in the entire nation. So, like, these kind of things will happen sometimes because it's like a kid has a growth spurt or maybe just pops it at an event where he was just completely off the radar before. And that's not the case with Drake, though. Like Drake had been on the radar, but it's like, oh man, he's this great defensive player with an offensive game that's coming around a little bit. But with Drake, that offensive game has really come around. He's turned into this insanely well-rounded player where the offensive game is starting to catch up to his defensive game. And to that point, what really put him over the top, where it was just absolutely bonkers, was his Peach Jam performance this year, combined with what he did during last school year. But at Peach Jam this summer, in those 5 games, He averaged 16.6 points, 10 rebounds, 3.6 assists. He shot 55% from the floor, 30 of 54. He shot 50% from three, 9 of 18. And he shot 87.5% from the free throw line, 14 of 16. And I know that's a small-ish sample size, but against Peach Jam is the best competition in the high school summer recruiting circuit. And he's doing that. Drake Powell is doing it. And it's not just rivals that's noticing this. This time last year, he was 66th at rivals. So he's gone from 66th to 8th in the span of a year. At 247 this time last year, he was 56th. Now at 247, he's all the way up to 4th. I mean, all of this rise, it is insane and it's astronomical. And so an interesting question is our guy, Big Kush, who's always in checking things out on YouTube, is in our Discord conversations. It's so good. He posed this question to me earlier this summer, and I've been saving it, and now's a great time to pull it out. Big Kush said, my question is, who do you believe will have the biggest breakout season for Carolina between Drake Powell and Ian Jackson their freshman year? And this now is a really, really difficult question to answer, and here's why. For the longest time, it was clearly Drake Powell as having the biggest breakout because Ian Jackson had been on the radar, and Drake Powell was just going to burst on the scene and be like, here I am. But I could honestly make the argument, Kush and others wondering the same thing, for either of these guys now, and here's why. Drake is now ranked higher than Ian Jackson at 3 of the 4 main recruiting sites. Drake is 8th at Rivals, Ian is 9th. Drake is 4th at 247, Ian is 10th. Drake is 12th at ESPN, Ian is 17th. The lone recruiting site where Ian is higher is On3, where Ian's 10th and Drake is 25th. Either way, both of these guys are so high. But with Drake now higher, it's just like, I'm still trying to wrap my brain around it because, and you all know this, ultimately these preseason or these high school rankings mean nothing until they get on campus and start doing it. It's just like preseason rankings. It's fun for us to talk about, but it doesn't mean diddly squat until they perform on the court. But back to the question of a bigger breakout. On one hand, it's got to be Drake because he came out of nowhere. Meanwhile, Ian has been on the elite 5-star radar for a long time. So to that point, Drake is clearly the bigger breakout because of this quick ascension and then rising onto the scene next year. But on the other hand, because of Drake's more recent breakout, I think people are severely sleeping on what Ian Jackson will do. So to that point, he might have the bigger breakout because people are forgetting him because they're so enamored with the new flashy toy in Drake Powell. And that's not a knock against Drake Powell. It just is the fact of the matter. But when you've been around for a long time, people start to forget how awesome you are. And that's true about Ian Jackson. So to that regard, because he's a little more forgotten, he could be the breakout next season when he comes to Chapel Hill. Ultimately, for me, I think the answer to Kush's question comes down to opportunity. Who has more playing time? Who's playing in front of each guy? Some of it's going to be skill set dependent, right? Like in some ways, Ian Jackson's skill set as being probably the more still the more skilled offensive player of the two, the guy that is going to be poppy and flashy and is going to be like, oh, he's bursting onto the radar. While some of Drake's like defensive skill set and things he does really special aren't necessarily seen as much by people. So to that regard, it could be Ian. But here's the bottom line for me. The fact that we're having trouble deciding who's going to be the bigger breakout star next year is awesome. It's great for Carolina to have both these guys top 10, essentially at 2 of the 4 recruiting sites and top 25 at all 4 of them. And so this is a great problem to have. And then obviously we got to wait and see where things going to be at after this season, right? We can't really know yet. Is RJ going to come back? What kind of year is Elliot going to have this year? Will he come back for the 24-25 season? Who's going to replace Armando when he's gone? Who's going to be the man in the front court? Can Jalen Washington beef up and step into that role? Is Carolina going to have to dip into the transfer portal? We just don't know. But ultimately, what a win to have 2 guys of the ilk of Ian Jackson and Drake Powell. Great win for Carolina. But Kush, to answer your question, I think the bigger breakout is Drake Powell next year. Well, turning to the gridiron, September was good. It was really good for the football Tar Heels. But my next question, can that trend continue in October? We're going to explore the upcoming homestand in just a minute. But first, I need to tell you that this episode of Locked On Tar Heels is brought to you by Game Time. My wife and her friends just randomly decided to go to a Braves game on a recent girls trip this past weekend, and they were in business because last-minute tickets are doable to find. Same thing. You shouldn't have to worry when you're trying to buy tickets to your next big event. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, theaters, and more near you. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. My favorite part of this whole thing is the view from your seat feature that allows you to see what things look like right from where you're sitting. All-in prices show up total up front, so you know you're getting a great deal without all those hidden fees on the back end. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Want to remind you all that Locked On College Football Kickoff Live is coming at you 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern this Friday on every Locked On College YouTube page, including our very own Locked On Tar Heels YouTube page. Make sure you check it out to get ready for this weekend of college football. All right, so here's my question. Is 7-0 a realistic possibility for Carolina at the end of the upcoming 3-game homestand? Perhaps asked another way. At the beginning of the season, if I had offered you 6-1 after the first 7 games, you would have taken that, right? Absolutely, you would have. But now I'm getting greedy. Now that we know Carolina's 4-0 after those first games, knocking off 3 Power 5 conference opponents from 3 different Power 5 conferences, knocking off a plucky App State team. I think plucky is probably doing them a disservice. A really talented and skilled and upstart App State team. Carolina's 4-0 after all of that, including a true road game in conference. So now I'm greedy. I want 7-0. And honestly, I want more after that at Georgia Tech hosting Campbell. No reason Carolina couldn't get to 9-0 without, I was almost going to say without breaking a sweat. That ain't true. That ain't true. They got a lot of sweats to break, but it's very real to look ahead and think about that. But right now, I want to hone in on this. September was good. Oh, it was very, very good for the football Tar Heels. But what about these first 3 weeks of October, where Carolina has a 3-game homestand? I want to set the table for what's next and what to expect before the Tar Heels take to the road again at the end of the month and head down to Atlanta to try to exercise some demons against Georgia Tech. So here we go. Here's the schedule upcoming the next 3 weeks. Hosting Syracuse this weekend, October 7th. It's a 3:30 kickoff. It's on ESPN. Carolina has the lines have Carolina 8.5 at our friends at FanDuel, the official sports book of the Locked On Network. But looking around at some other places, I won't name them, but Carolina's favored by 9 at another prominent sports betting site, 6.5 at another one. ESPN's matchup predictor gives Carolina a 60.9% chance to win this weekend against Syracuse. But man, it's going to be tough. Coach Chiz talked about on Monday at the press conference. The team goes as quarterback Garrett Schrader goes. Got to be ready for that. We'll come back to it. Then the next weekend, hosting Miami. That's the big one right here in the middle. That is either going to be a kickoff at noon or 7:30. So we'll watch out for that. And then Virginia to wrap up this 3-game homestand on October 21st. No line for this one yet, but here's the thing. ESPN's matchup predictor, it gives Carolina a 91.6% chance to win this game. Poor Virginia just is not very good. I thought they were going to get that first win this weekend, but they couldn't pull it off. So here's the thing for me. you start at the end of this and you never want to look past anybody. But again, Virginia, it's just not good. They're just not good. And you obviously cannot look past Syracuse if you're the Tar Heels. But I'm going to right now because I'm not the Tar Heels. And I want to talk about Miami because this, to me, is the game that's in the middle of this homestand. That's the potential bugaboo. Again, all due respect to Syracuse, but Miami. That matchup predictor from ESPN that I've been talking about, Miami actually is favored in this game, even though it's in Chapel Hill, 53.5% chance according to matchup predictor. Now, it's not a big prediction in Miami's favor, but it is in Miami's favor. So let's look at what the Canes have done a little bit. Their one impressive win to me is they beat Texas A&M, who was ranked 23rd at the time, 48-33. And that was at home. Sure, good job. But outside of that, Miami, to be fair, has had massive lopsided victories outside of that A&M game. But here, you know who their other three opponents are? The other Miami of Ohio, who hasn't been good since Ben Roethlisberger, Bethune-Cookman, and Temple. Oh, an absolute murderer's row. Way to go, Miami. No, you can't take anything away from any of those games other than the fact that Temple was on the road. Okay, great job. And even this weekend, Miami is hosting Georgia Tech. I don't know how much you're going to learn from that either. So Miami's coming to Chapel Hill in 2 weeks for what is going to be their first true, real road test of the season with, again, well, I was going to say all due respect to Temple. I'm not giving much due respect to Temple because I'm not. So in the same way that Carolina will have some potential, don't look past Syracuse this weekend, here's another factor when Carolina hosts Miami. The week after that, Miami is hosting Clemson. So there's some potential look-ahead factor for the Hurricanes when they come calling to Chapel Hill soon. But here's the thing we all got to remember. Miami's coming to Chapel Hill, and they're looking for revenge. Do you remember why? The Tar Heels are riding a 4-game winning streak in this series. I don't think you would have probably guessed that unless you just had it in your head. The Tar Heels have legitimately won 4 straight in this series, 2 in each stadium, 2 down in Coral Gables, 2 in Chapel Hill. But here's the thing. We all remember the massive and incredible and super fun blowout to end the 2020 season, right? Like when Javonte Williams and Michael Carter just went buck wild running on the ground, both over 200 yards rushing. The other 3 wins in this streak have all been by 3 points. No more, no less, exactly 3 points. So you take that, outlier out and throw it away. Carolina has only won the other 3 games in this 4-game winning streak by a total of 9 points. So that is more what I expect in this game when Miami comes with revenge on the mind, thinking that they've been doing something as well. But against the one legit opponent they've played, they gave up 33 points to Texas A&M. And that was at home. So can Carolina's defense, which the statistics that I'm looking at are so much improved from where they were last year. We'll get into a lot of those, like the nitty gritty on those stats as we start to get ready for Syracuse later in the week. But for me, Carolina should be able to score on Miami. I'm not worried about that. And then the question is, can this defense keep doing a little bit of what they've been doing? We'll see on that. I legit think they can. But in all this, again, I think that Carolina should be able to handle Miami. But you cannot overlook Syracuse this weekend. That would be your biggest mistake. You can't have one of those letdown games. It just cannot be allowed to happen. And I don't think it will be because Carolina has now spent 2 weeks preparing to host Syracuse. And yes, they've took their first L of the season against Clemson this past weekend. But before that, undefeated. And with a tough quarterback like they have, Syracuse, Carolina can ill afford to look past them because we know what some great quarterbacks can do to the Tar Heels. So, look past them at your own peril. Now, to answer my own question about is 7-0 a realistic thing? Yeah, I really think it is for the Tar Heels. It's more than just doable. I, at this point, would be disappointed if Carolina was not 7-0 after this homestand. Now, I know, like I said, if you had offered me or I had offered you 6-1 after 7 games at the beginning of the season, I would have taken it gladly. But now, knowing where we're at, knowing what Carolina's doing, I want it. I want 7-0 so bad I can taste it. So you got to start by taking care of business against Syracuse. Then you got to handle Miami. You just have to do it. And then you can't, the other thing is, while Virginia should be a walkover, you just cannot overlook it, because there's always that potential for a down, like think about the South Carolina game to start the year and how Carolina was kind of down against App State after that. You just have to play Miami big and then be ready to go again against Virginia, and then just keep stacking wins week after week after week. That's what it's got to be. Well, it's awesome. These games are all going to be at home. Keenan's got to be rocking. Syracuse game is already a sellout. And again, we'll get to that later in the week, but I'm expecting big things from these Tar Heels, and I know that you are too. Well, to wrap up the show today, I want to talk some about the transfer portal, because we are finally getting to the point where some changes to it might be imminent in terms of what the actual portal window looks like in terms of length and when it is. We'll get to that in just a second. But first, I need to tell you that this episode of Locked On Tar Heels is brought to you by Bird Dogs. I got to tell you, shorts and pants for me have always been something I just don't really care much about, to be honest. Whew. But that was before I ever put on a pair of Bird Dogs. And holy cow, let me tell you, now that I have, I think a lot about shorts and pants now, because these Bird Dog shorts and pants are awesome. I love them. I wear my Bird Dog shorts every time I go to the gym. I've got multiple pairs of them because they're just so wildly comfortable to wear while you're working out. But it's cool because Bird Dog shorts are awesome for any occasion, not just athletic wear. Personal, professional, or anything in between, Bird Dogs has got it. These Bird Dog shorts, they just fit way better than regular shorts made of stiff, restricting cotton. And then the other thing I really love is that Bird Dogs use this anti-stink sweat wicking fabric that keep you cool and dry all day long. I can't wait to get into the fall weather so I can start wearing my Bird Dogs pants. Man, I wore them around my house all weekend this past weekend. So go to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege or enter code LOCKEDONCollege at checkout for a free Bird Dogs water bottle with your order. That's birddogs.com/lockedoncollege for a free water bottle at checkout. You won't want to take off your Bird Dogs. I guarantee you that. Okay, let me talk to you about the transfer portal. We know that it's been, just kind of getting into action. And now the NCAA is starting to look at how do we tweak it. And I'm going to focus in specifically on basketball, because that's where it seems to be the biggest part of conversation, specifically around things that Carolina is doing. So this week, as we're talking on Tuesday, the D1 Council is meeting today, Tuesday, and tomorrow, Wednesday. And the expectation is that they are going to shorten the length of the transfer portal window. We know that right now it is in every sport in the NCAA that adheres to the transfer portal, that it's 60 days. For basketball, it was 60 days in a row, but for fall and spring sports, it's divided up into like a 45 and a 15, depending on your sport. And so the starting date for that has been the day right after championship selection. So, for example, with football, it opens up, the transfer portal did last year, the day after all the bowl announcements were made. In basketball last year, it opened the Monday, the day after selection Sunday. So that's in play, but also the shortening of the transfer portal, because everyone's thoughts on it are that players don't need 60 days to figure this out specifically. And the reason I want to talk more about it in basketball, because it's 60 days in a row. You kind of already know if you're going to hop in, and you might already know where you want to go, although you probably shouldn't, because that's shady dealings, right? And so I'm expecting, and from what we've read from people like Nicole Auerbach at The Athletic, that they'll, quote, discuss and act on the issue when the D1 Council meets this week. And of note, Auerbach says, quote, any changes to the length of the transfer windows would be effective immediately. So even though fall sports are underway, because the transfer portal won't have opened yet, they will apply to this academic year. So, for example, let's say it's cut down to 30 days for basketball. We would have a shorter window, and I'm hoping at least that they're going to push back when it starts so that it won't be the day after selection Sunday. I'll say more on that in a minute. Per council chair Linda Teeler, who is the deputy AD at Florida, she says this, quote, "The priority, I believe, for the council and most of the membership would be to have transfer windows that are closer to 30 days versus the 60 that currently exist." But here's an interesting tweak. It's kind of like having the NFL owners against the NFL Players Union. Because another quote from Linda Teeler says, quote, "The Student Athlete Advisory Committee prefers 45 days. For sure, we will have a discussion during the council meetings about what the appropriate window lengths will be and if those windows will be consistent across all sports. So it is very much a point of conversation," end quote. So a couple things there. I would imagine that one way or another, we're going to land at 30 or 45 or somewhere in between. I think we will definitely get a shortened window. It will not be 60. But the questions are, when will that time frame start? And then also, you heard something in there that I haven't thought about before, that I've not heard about from before until we get this from the actual D1 Council. The possibility that different sports might have different lengths of transfer portal windows. So we'll keep an eye on that from these meetings the next couple days. But here's what I'm looking at is, so basically there's two things. We're looking at duration and start date. As for college basketball, I'm all in on a 30-day transfer portal window. 45 is great too. That's great. But yeah, I agree 60 days is too long. Probably more at stake for me is the start date. I would rather it be, like, if I had my druthers in an ideal world, I would like for it to be after the national championship games in college basketball. Let the basketball stand alone. Let the coaching staffs, the general managers, if for schools that use those, just focus on the task at hand, the postseason. For schools that are already done, you can start having conversations. Guys can go ahead and say they're entering the transfer portal, but you can't declare anything official until it actually opens. I just like allowing the basketball season to go. And then after it's over, heck, for all I care, you can start it on Tuesday, the day after the national championship. Although I'd love to wait another week and start it the next week so that the national championship can get its shine. And then we move into free agency in the offseason. And then you have your 30 days. Let's do it that way, right? I just think that makes a ton of sense and is better for coaches because they don't have divided attention. That's just not fair or good or healthy for the sport or these coaches, anything like that. So that's what I'm looking at. At the very least, we got to push it back till later than Selection Sunday. You know, maybe something like post Elite 8 when you've only got 4 teams left. Still, it's not fair to those teams, but whatever. It could be helpful in terms of having conversations at the Final Four because that's where a bunch of coaches go and hang out and stuff. So we'll see. But for me, I'm all in on a shortened window. And as for me, I want to see the window open in college basketball after the national championship happens. I still like the divided for fall and spring sports, you know, for football, for example, you get your window after the national championship's over, or if they push that one back too. And then I also like having the second window after spring practice when you start to see depth charts and stuff like that and get a better idea if you're going to play. I think that's only fair, but shorter and later, that's my call. We'll see what happens, and we'll probably find out more this week. That's it for today's episode of Locked On Tar Heels. Thanks so much for tuning in. Make sure you join us tomorrow when Coach Pat Kilby will be with me as always. Follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Heels. Follow me on Twitter at Isaac Shade. Longer, more in-depth conversations. Maybe you got some questions like Big Kush. Send it to lockedontarheels@gmail.com or join our Discord. Come have conversation in there. You can drop questions in there. Don't forget to subscribe on audio and video formats. Smash the like button if you're watching so we know that you're here. Friends, it's always a great day to be a Tar Heel. We'll talk again tomorrow. But until then, peace.